In this presentation, we're going to talk about the principles of multimedia learning. We're going to define that in just a moment, but I'm so excited about the content here because these principles will help you develop and create stronger PowerPoint presentations, video, as well as just content that you might put on your Moodle page or in your e-learning course. And not only will they help you design better looking presentations, but they're actually going to help learners or your colleagues or whoever you may be presenting to. You're actually going to clear up space for their brain to process the information that you're presenting. So let's jump into it. So, Richard Mayer is a very well known educational psychologist, and he first discussed these principles in 1999. And he's alive and well and very active as a scholar. And so, as technology and multimedia and e-learning have grown, he's continued to make publications, sharing more research into each of these principles, as well as applying these principles to e-learning. But he defines multimedia learning as learning from words and pictures. And the words and pictures can be in a variety of form. They can be moving or they can be still. But pretty much anything that we're doing where we're using words and pictures, even if that's a textbook, can be counted as multimedia learning. So your textbook counts as multimedia. Let's look at some of these principles and how we can apply them to our online or face-to-face courses. So, the multimedia principle says exactly what we all experienced as children, with the flashcards, with the letter on it, and then a picture that represents the letter. And the reason why that those two things were paired is because we learn better, we comprehend better when there's a picture associated with an image. That one's not rocket science, and I feel like we all really know that. The next is the personalization principle. And and this is something that I have struggled with when I'm writing content or creating videos about just how formal I should be, right? Because I don't want to be too formal, but I don't want to be too relaxed. And that the truth is that we actually learn better when words or content is in a conversational style rather than a formal style. But we are in a professional and academic environment, so we don't want to be all the way at the left end of the scale, but we definitely don't want to be all the way at the right end of the scale in the top hat. We want to stay right here. In a place that's still professional but can and academic, but also a conversational style that's accessible to students who come from a variety of backgrounds. The pre-training principle: if you're presenting content and you're using words or names that you think are common knowledge, but would be necessary for them to understand the new material that you're presenting, it's best to pre train students or present that vocabulary at the beginning of a presentation. So, for example, I defined multimedia, right, as anything that has text and images because we're using the word multimedia so much throughout this presentation. Another example is the online teaching and learning course. I used the term text editor so many times in a module that wasn't about the text editor. And I got a question finally, at the end of what's a text editor? And, the person who posed the question, instead of really hearing all the content and understanding it, they were trying to figure out what a text editor was. And I thought, well, everyone uses a text editor, but they're not calling it a text editor. They don't call it anything or they call it something else. So it's important that you make sure everyone's on the same page by pre-training students for names that you're going to use, characteristics or vocabularies that's going to be necessary for them to understand the main concept that you're trying to deliver. Segmenting and chunking. We've talked about this throughout our online teaching and learning course about breaking up content into bite sized pieces. But that's just because the research shows that we learn better when content is presented in segments. And one thing about this principle is it specifies user paced segments, right? And so in an online course, that means that students have some control over when they want to view the next segment of the content. They can go back, maybe it's through a navigation arrow, maybe it's because you've listed the different videos and they can press play or pause or rewind. But it just means that they have some control over, you're using the lesson feature so they can press next or back. They have some control over when they view the content. The coherence principle. This is one that I regularly contradict and I am working on, right? Because these principles, you may not apply them all, but this is one that I regularly don't do. And that is that we have to exclude any words, pictures, or sounds that are irrelevant. They could be interesting, they could be fun, they could be cool, but if it's not directly related to mastery of the content, it's more likely that it will distract someone than it is that the absence of it will distract someone. So, for example, sometimes I want to put background music in my videos because I think it sounds, nice and calming. But the truth of the matter is that background music does not support or doesn't, if it doesn't connect directly to what I'm talking about, then the chances are is that background music is going to be distracting for a learner. Then that someone would say, I really wanted to listen to your video, but it was just so silent in the background that I couldn't pay attention, right? So, oops, didn't mean to do that. Let's look at an example of this. This picture, I love it. I think it's so professional looking. I think it makes this slide look so much better. But this woman thinking has nothing to do with the coherence principle. And if you were to think back about segmenting, you might remember the orange and how it was broken into pieces. That's a reminder of segmenting. But this woman thinking would not be a mnemonic device that would help you remember what the coherence principle is. Even though I like it, I should exclude it. This image, however, I don't like it nearly as much, and to be honest, I would just opt for no image at all. But this image reminds you that if students are getting all this background noise and words and extra pictures that aren't related to the content, that's going to be distracting and overwhelming for them and make it harder for them to understand, right? So this picture is a better use of the coherence principle. This was a gift that I was going to put on the course. It's cool. I liked it. But the truth of the matter was, this gift wasn't helpful to you understanding what the assignment was. So I took it out, even though it was cool. Signaling principle. We learn better in face to face environments when someone points to something because they're pointing to that something makes it clear that what we think they're talking about and what they're actually talking about are the same things, right? They are highlighting, that is in the wrong place and I do not know why, but they are highlighting, okay, the organization of the essential material. So that box should have been over the word highlight, but you can use boxes, you can highlight words, you can bold them, you can italicize them, make different size fonts, header fonts or subheader fonts, all arrows. Those are all ways that you can signal what's important. And I'm going to use signaling in some other slides as examples. I get questions about this sometimes, and that's the image principle. People say, okay, well, should I do should I record myself in addition to recording my screen? You can if you want, but you don't have to. The research shows that people don't necessarily learn more deeply when you have that picture in picture or recording of yourself with your content. It doesn't also necessarily distract them either. So it's really your call. My personal opinion is if you're dealing with first time college students or first time online, they're freshmen, maybe you want to add that there just to help them. If you're dealing with students that maybe have some processing issues with social cues, that might help them, but it's not necessarily going to deepen their understanding of the content. And this is me signaling to you, I forgot. This is me signaling to you like the picture in picture, right? A recording of you at the bottom of the recording. Modality principle. This just says that we learn better through hearing it than seeing the text on the screen. And we're going to look at some examples of this in just a second. When you think about accessibility, remember that if someone needs text on screen, they have the option, or they should have the option, of turning on closed captioning. So if someone has an accessibility need, that is a different situation, and that's not necessarily related to this principle. But they should be able to have narration so that they are closed captioning so that they can read the narration. Okay. This is a before and after slide. On this slide, it's all text. There's a picture, but I don't actually know what that picture connects to. It's just there. It's a lot of words. And so if I had to read this slide while you're talking to me about this slide, that's going to be hard. A better slide is a slide on the right. I've replaced I replaced all of that text with an image of the site so you have a better idea of where we did this experiment. In my narration, I will talk about that it's in Norway and that we set up 12 devices around this study site, and then I'll refer to this picture of the apparatus that we use, and I'm using signaling to point to arrows as I explain what this apparatus does. And this is actually a more not only engaging slide, but also a slide that will help your audience better capture the information that you're presenting. The redundancy principle. Okay, this can also be a challenge, especially in the world of PowerPoint presentations where people just read exactly what they have on the slide. I've been very intentional in this video, even though sometimes I don't do it. Sometimes I violate this principle. I do it all the time. I've been very intentional about, one, giving you time to process the text on screen before I start talking, and two, not making my narration exactly what is on the screen. So I'm not reading word for word. This is a simplified version of this, but I'm not, on the screen isn't bears eating honey and then I'm saying bears enjoy eating honey, right? Not doing that. So just think about using graphics and narration versus graphic narration and on-screen text that are all communicating the same exact thing. That redundancy actually seems like it would help. It's counterintuitive. It seems like it would help, but it actually hurts because students are using an unnecessary load trying to process all three of those things in different ways, even though they're all saying the same thing. So here's an example. Let's say this is my image and this is the text on screen, and here's the audio. The f number, or f-stop, is related to the aperture in the camera, which adjusts the amount of light you let in. Remember that the smaller the f number, the larger the opening or aperture that will let light into the camera. Here's a sequence of photos taken at f numbers ranging from f2.7 to f7.1. Okay, this is a lot for you as a learner. I'm reading it to you, so you're having to listen while you're also probably trying to read it yourself, and then you're going to have to try and look at this image, and some of you might go straight to the image while I'm talking, right, and try to be processing the image while you're listening to me and while you're reading the text on top. Here's a better way to do that. Breaking this into smaller sides. So the f number, or f-stop, is related to the aperture in the camera, which adjusts the amount of light you let in. Remember that the smaller the f number, the larger the opening or aperture that will let light into the camera. Here's a sequence of photos taken at f numbers ranging from f2.7 to f7.1. Take a minute to see the difference in these photos. Okay, so if that was my presentation, I've broken that up, right? And then I've also signaled you, and then I've given you time just to process this image on your own. So that's a way that you can fix that. Oop. The embodiment principle. This really applies online especially. And what do we mean by human-like interactions? The best application of this is that if you are explaining a drawing, students will actually learn better by watching you draw it as you explain it than you showing them the completed drawing. So that means that you would actually draw it as you explain it versus showing them the image in the top right corner that's already completely drawn and then just explaining it as they watch you explain it. Spatial continuity. This is one that's often violated because we just don't even think about it. I'm sorry, spatial contiguity, wrong word. And that just means it's our mind's association to things. But we need to present words near the pictures that we're talking about and not far away from each other. Sometimes online we violate this because they have to scroll down to view the picture, and you don't want that. As much as possible, you want the picture to be able to fit in the window so they can see the picture and the text. That may mean you have to break the text into smaller paragraphs. Another way we do this is through our diagrams. So check this diagram out on the right. To process this diagram, you have to look at, okay, A, the part it's pointing to, and then go down to the bottom and see that it's frontal lobe, right? And you may not initially think that this is a bad image, but here's a better image. Both are communicating the same exact information. The only difference is with this second image, the text and the area of the image that it's referring to are right next to each other. So I don't have to waste space going back and forth trying to remember, wait, what was E again? No, I don't even have to remember, I don't even have to add an E into the equation. I can look at the parietal lobe and I know exactly where it is. So this is actually a better image for comprehension.